I came home on a Thursday. I was not meant to return. My suitcase wheels were still warm from the bus station when I heard laughing in my kitchen. A man's voice said, "To us, June." And then he kissed my wife by the sink where I used to slice apples for her tea. My wife smiled and said, "To us," like she had said it 100 times before, like she was someone I didn't know. My name is Harlan Quaid, and I am 68 years old. I fixed school buses for 35 years and taught my daughter how to count by timing the turn signals. I have never been a rich man, but I have been steady. I am the kind of man who keeps every receipt in a shoebox and knows which light bulbs fit which rooms. I pretended to go on a trip to Boise for a veterans reunion. I took a bus out, sat in the depot for 2 hours, and then took a different bus straight back. I wanted to see what the house felt like when I was supposed to be gone, because lately the rooms felt staged, like a play that ended when I entered. The man in my kitchen wore my church tie. He stirred honey into the mug that says Husband of the Year, a joke gift Margot bought me when our daughter, Nadine, was 12. He called her June, and the name sat on her like a borrowed coat that somehow fit. Margot's hair was up, the apron I used to wrap around my waist on Sundays tied to her neat like a bow on a box. They had a playlist going, something soft, and they were moving slow in that way you move when there is no fear of being seen. It was a kind of dancing Margot, and I had not done since our 20s, back when my ribs still felt like a bridge to something bigger. I stepped into the doorway, and the air thinned. Margot froze, shoulders high. The man set my mug down. Honey clung to the spoon like a bright string between us. "Harlan," she said in a voice that used to calm me at night. "You're supposed to be in Idaho." Her eyes darted to the clock, to the back door, to the laundry room where our dog, Jasper, used to sleep before his legs quit last winter. This isn't what you think." He had a clean-cut jaw and a carpenter's hands. He looked like the boys I used to see at the hardware store picking out stain for decks they would never finish. "I think you're June," I said. My voice sounded like it had been poured through gravel. "And he is wearing my tie." I could feel my fingers tingle, the way they do when a winter storm is coming. I set down my small rolling bag beside the coat rack that still leans a little from the time Nadine ran into it at 9 years old. I stared at the tie. It was the one Margot had bought me the first Easter after her mother died, a deep green that made my eyes look alive in the church light. It felt like he was wearing my April. Nadine's voice carried from the hallway. "Mom, did you forget the—" She stepped into the kitchen with a folder and saw me. The folder slipped from her hands, papers fluttering like startled birds. She looked older than I had let myself notice, the kind of older that comes from staying mad. "Dad," she said flat, "you said you were gone for the weekend." My daughter has my mouth, but not my patience. She works long shifts at the hospital and calls me Pop when she wants something and Dad when she wants me to stop asking questions. We were once a team, me, her, and Margot, our feet under the same table, our jokes about Mr. Langley next door who mowed at dawn. Now she stood with the stranger like a line had been drawn and I was on the wrong side. Margot reached for my hand, then pulled back like there was heat in it. "Harlan, please," she said. "Let us explain." I looked at the man and he nodded, respectful like he had practiced it in a mirror. "I'm Corbett," he said. "An uncommon name. One of those names parents pick because they don't want the teacher to look up and have two heads turn." He was probably 55. He could have been a friend from church, a friend from the woodshop, a man I might have trusted with a chainsaw. This is not what you think," he repeated. "People who are doing wrong say that like it is a spell to untie knots." "What I think," I said, "is that my wife has another name, my tie is on another neck, and my daughter knows more than she tells me." I heard myself and hated that I sounded calm, like a man reading a grocery list. I wanted to throw the mug, the honey, the radio. I wanted to shake the house and make all the pictures clatter. But my mother raised me to hold still when a hornet lands on you. I have held still my whole life for other people's stings. The radio switched songs. A woman sang about a second chance like it was a bird that would land if you stayed very quiet. Nadine bent to gather the papers. One page faced me, a stamp heavy and blue at the bottom. "Power of attorney," it said. The words were plain and sharp. "Nadine," I asked, "what is that?" She stood up too fast, and the blood rushed to her cheeks. "You forget things, Dad," she said. "You leave the stove on. You wander." I have left the stove on once. I went as far as the mailbox and forgot the envelope with the water bill, then went back in, got it, and mailed it. I have not wandered. I have walked around the block to clear my head like anyone would. It's for your safety, she added, but the way she looked at the paper told me safety was not the whole story. Margot tried on her soft voice. Harlan, I never meant to hurt you. Corbett and I met at the Senior Arts Center. We talked. We were lonely in the same room. She looked at the sink like it might explain her. We helped each other when Jasper died. It got bigger. The radio hummed. The refrigerator rattled like an old man clearing his throat. My body felt like a code on someone else's hanger. And June? I asked. She flinched. It's a name I used once as a girl, she said. It felt like a fresh start. I thought of the Sunday I painted the spare room light blue because she said the old beige felt like an old promise. I thought of how she smiled at the wet wall and called me her steady. I stood very still because the hornet had landed. Nadine set the folder on the counter and looked at Margot, then at me. Her eyes were hard marble. Dad, we're doing what's best, she said. You should not be alone here when Mom is out, when I'm at work. We found a place, Maple Crest. It's nice. It's clean. There's a garden. You'll have friends. Maple Crest is where we took Mrs. Avery when she started leaving her oven open and the curtains singed. Maple Crest smells like lemon soap and old magazines. I opened my mouth to ask when we started, meaning not me, and Margot lifted the folder and slid one page out. The blue stamp stared back. We already put down the deposit, she said, like she was discussing a new fence. It was fast. They had a room. My bones spoke first, in a language I had not used since I was a boy on my father's farm, when the sky went dark at noon and we ran to tie down what we could. Something in me was tying down. Something else was drawing a map. I looked at the man in my tie, at the names on the paper, at the kitchen that had been my ship through years I cannot get back. I nodded. All right, I said. You have a plan. My voice did not shake. I picked up my small bag and rolled it across the tile. I need to get my coat, I added, though I was not cold. I walked down the hall to the bedroom and closed the door. The room smelled like dryer sheets and hand cream. Sunlight lay on our bed like a flat sheet of gold. In our closet, behind a box of Christmas lights, I had tucked a small spiral notebook and a cheap pen. In the notebook, I had written dates and times. The week before, I had opened a private mailbox at the shipping store by the laundromat and had letters forwarded there. I had noticed the car mileage and the missing wine and the way Margot let calls go to voicemail. I had seen Nadine's texts light Margot's phone, their words sharp in the glass, when she thought I was napping. The trip to Boise had been my test. The bus ride back was my answer key. My hands did not shake as I slid the notebook into my jacket pocket. The hornet buzzed off, and I was still here. I stepped back into the hallway and looked toward the kitchen. I could see the three of them in the bright square like figures on a stage. Corbett touched Margot's back with the ease of something long practiced. Nadine's jaw worked like she was chewing a hard truth. My house had changed shape without asking me, but I was still Harlan Quaid. I had rebuilt broken engines with less. I stood up straight, walked to the front door, and put my hand on the knob. Where are you going? Nadine asked, her voice sharp. I smiled in a way that did not show my teeth. I'm going to take a little drive, I said. To think. Margot took a step toward me. Harlan, please don't do anything foolish, she whispered. I opened the door. The fall air was clean as a promise. Across the street, the maple's leaves had flamed to red overnight. On the porch, I looked back at the life I had built with my hands and my quiet. I thought of Jasper's paw prints in the dried mud by the steps. I thought of Nadine's crayon sun still faint on the hallway wall where the paint never quite hit it. I thought of the honey string between us. How sweet can be a trap if you are not watching. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from a number I did not know. Mr. Quaid, this is Director Hall from Maple Crest. Just confirming arrival tomorrow at 10 a.m. for room orientation. I stared at the message until the words blurred. I lifted my head. The neighbor's wind chimes started in the breeze like a gentle alarm clock. I put the phone back in my pocket, took a breath that filled me all the way up, and asked myself aloud, very softly, what if I don't arrive? When I pulled out of the driveway that morning, the world looked exactly the same, but I wasn't. The sun still lit the cracked pavement. The neighbor's dog still barked at cars, and the flag on the miller's porch still hung limp. But something inside me had shifted, quiet and dangerous, like a fault line waiting for the right weight to move. I had spent 68 years keeping peace, swallowing anger, fixing things that were not my fault. Not this time. My old Ford sputtered like a smoker on a cold day. The radio played a country station, the kind that fills silence with soft heartbreak. I drove past the corner store, past the school Nadine once attended, past the pond where I used to take Margot every Sunday after church. She'd feed ducks and smile at me like she was looking at the man she'd marry again. Somewhere along the years, that look had turned into something polite and empty. I pulled into a diner 2 towns over, Maggie's Place. It's the kind of spot where the waitress calls everyone Han, and the smell of bacon grease feels like comfort. I ordered black coffee and toast, though I wasn't hungry. My hands shook when I reached for the cup. Anger does that. It looks like fear until it hardens. Across from me, an old man in a ball cap was reading the newspaper, nodding to himself. He caught my eye, gave me a small smile. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "Something like that," I muttered. He chuckled. "You married long?" 44 years, I said. "Or maybe just 30 good ones and 14 lies." He whistled low. "That's a long time to build something just to find out it was made of sand." I nodded, though my throat was tight. I had been thinking about those words, sand and time. I had built my life grain by grain, and now the tide had come. When I left the diner, I didn't head home. I drove toward the edge of town, where an old ranch sat half swallowed by weeds. My father used to take me there as a boy to fix fences. The owners had long since moved to Florida, leaving behind a barn that still stood proud against the sky. I parked behind it, turned off the engine, and sat in the silence. From my jacket, I took out the spiral notebook. I flipped through the pages, small notes about Margot's yoga nights, the extra wine bottles in the recycling bin, the money withdrawals from our joint account. I had even written down the first time I saw Corbett's truck parked outside the house. It felt strange, keeping evidence on the woman I had once sworn to protect. But when you've been made a fool of, truth becomes your only weapon. I wasn't sure what my plan was. All I knew was that I wasn't going to Maple Crest. I wasn't going to spend my final years in a room with a view of a dying garden, while the people who betrayed me lived easy. I wanted to live, not just breathe. As the sun dropped, I called an old number. Earl's Auto Salvage, a voice rasped. "Earl," I said. "It's Harlan Quaid." A pause. "Well, I'll be damned. Haven't heard that name in a decade. You still got that blue Ford running?" "Barely," I said. "But I need a favor." Earl laughed. "You sound like a man about to do something interesting." "Maybe I am," I said. "I just need a place to stay for a bit. Somewhere quiet." "You can have the trailer out back," he said. "It ain't pretty, but it's dry. And the coffee's free if you don't mind the taste of rust." That night, I slept in that trailer. The mattress smelled like oil and thyme, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't surrounded by the scent of Margot's perfume or the sound of someone else's plans. I fell asleep to the hum of distant traffic and the ache of something that felt like freedom. The next morning, I called Nadine. She didn't pick up, so I left a message. "Don't worry about Maple Crest," I said, my voice steady. "You can keep the deposit. Think of it as rent for the years I spent being the man you could lean on." I hung up before I could soften it. By noon, Margot called. Her voice was small, brittle. "Harlan, please. Come home. We can talk about this." "There's nothing left to talk about," I said. "You made your choice, June." Silence. Then a whisper. "You can't just disappear." "I can," I said. "And I have." I ended the call. That evening, Earl came by with 2 beers. "You look like a man who's either starting over or burning down the past," he said. "Maybe both," I replied. He sat on the steps with me, the sunset painting everything gold. "You know," he said, "starting over doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes it means remembering who you were before they broke you." His words stayed with me long after the beer went warm. That night, I opened the notebook again and wrote on the last page. "They think I'm broken. Let them. They'll never see me coming." And as the crickets began to sing outside the trailer window, I finally knew what I was going to do. Tomorrow, I would stop hiding. Tomorrow, I'd begin my quiet revenge, not with anger, but with patience. The kind of patience only an old man has. Because they had taken my home, my name, and my peace. But they had forgotten one thing. I had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind there is. Morning came slow through the dusty trailer blinds. The air was thick with the smell of oil and rain, and the sound of freight trains in the distance. I sat on the edge of the cot, running my thumb over the old wedding band still on my finger. It had carved a pale groove into my skin, a mark of loyalty that had long outlived its promise. I wanted to take it off, but when I tried, it wouldn't move. Maybe it was habit, or maybe the metal had learned to hold on tighter than the heart that wore it. I washed my face in the sink and looked in the cracked mirror. The man staring back at me wasn't weak. He wasn't pitiful. He was patient. My father used to say, "Harlan, when a man wants to disappear, the trick isn't to hide. It's to stop being who they think you are." So that's what I did. I started with the small things. I shaved the beard Margot always said made me look distinguished. Without it, I looked rougher, younger in a way that didn't feel right, but worked in my favor. Then I went into town. I sold my Ford to a used lot for a few $100s. The salesman didn't even look me in the eye. "Tough market for old trucks," he said. I smiled. Perfect. Next, I walked to the local library. It still smelled of dust and coffee. I used one of the computers to order a prepaid phone and open a new email under the name Harvey Quinn. Harvey, close enough to Harlan to answer to it if someone called out, but far enough that no one would connect the dots. I used a P.O. box address I'd already set up. Earl lent me his old pickup, beat up but dependable. "Don't worry about bringing it back anytime soon," he said, tossing me the keys. "You've earned some quiet." Quiet. That word had followed me all my life. I was the quiet husband, the quiet father, the quiet fool. But this time, quiet meant control. I wasn't hiding out of fear. I was watching from the dark. I drove south for hours, through dry plains and small towns that smelled like rain and diesel. Every mile between me and Margot felt like an apology I didn't need to make. By evening, I ended up in a small town called Rosehaven, one of those blinking you'll miss it places with a single diner, a post office, and a main street that hadn't changed since the 1960s. I rented a small room above a pawn shop. The landlord, a gray-haired woman named Ruth, asked no questions. "You staying long?" she asked. "Just till I figure out where home is," I said. Ruth nodded. "Ain't we all?" That night, I sat by the window and watched people drift by under the orange streetlights. I thought about Nadine, my daughter, the little girl who used to run barefoot through sprinklers and cry when I burned her pancakes. Somewhere along the years, she stopped needing me and started managing me. I wondered if she'd feel a shred of guilt when she found out I never arrived at Maple Crest. Or maybe she'd just shrug and say, "That's Dad." Always stubborn. I took out the notebook again. My next move wasn't about anger. It was about truth. They wanted to erase me quietly, to tuck me away somewhere safe so they could live without guilt. I was going to make sure the truth didn't disappear with me. Over the next week, I called a lawyer in Rosehaven. Her name was Eliza Bauer, young but sharp. "Mr. Quinn," she said over the phone, "what kind of help do you need?" "The kind that keeps people from stealing what's mine," I replied. We met in her office, a small room with a dusty flag and a window that faced the street. I told her everything. The affair, the power of attorney, the plan to move me into a nursing home I didn't need. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You've got grounds, Harlan. Strong ones. But if you go public, it'll get messy." "I don't want messy," I said. "I want quiet justice." Eliza smiled. "Then we'll do this smart." Over the next few days, we started untangling everything. Bank accounts, property deeds, pension statements. It turned out Margot had been moving money from our joint savings into a separate account months before. My name had been quietly removed from the house deed. Nadine had helped her sign the papers. Betrayal had a paper trail, and I was collecting every breadcrumb. Meanwhile, I sent a letter to Nadine, no return address, just a single line written in my careful handwriting. "When you bury the living, make sure the ground doesn't shift." It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. 2 weeks passed. I worked odd jobs around Rosehaven, fixing fences, repairing tractors, sweeping out barns. The work was honest. The people called me Harvey. Nobody asked about my past. I slept better in that small room than I had in years. Then, one morning, I saw something that froze me. On the front page of the local newspaper was a small article. "Local woman seeks missing husband, 68, last seen leaving home before scheduled move to retirement facility." There was a photo of me, smiling, arm around Margot, at Nadine's nursing school graduation. My face looked soft, trusting, tired. Beneath it, her quote, "My father's been confused lately. We just want to make sure he's safe." Confused. Safe. Those were the words people used when they wanted to rewrite your story. I folded the paper and slipped it into my jacket. The waitress, Ruth's niece, came by and refilled my coffee. "You okay, Mr. Quinn?" she asked. I smiled. Never better. But inside, something sharp had settled. They thought they were shaping the story. They thought I was lost. But I was just getting started. That night, I mailed another envelope to Eliza. Copies of the papers, the withdrawals, the altered deed. "When it's time," I wrote, "I'll let you know. Until then, stay quiet." And as I sealed the envelope, I whispered to the empty room, "They wanted me gone. I'll give them what they wanted, but on my terms." The next morning, I packed my things, left the rent on the counter, and drove out of Rosehaven. The wind through the cracked windows smelled like freedom and old dust. If they wanted a ghost, I would become one. But not the kind that haunts. The kind that watches. The kind that waits. The first time I saw my own face on a missing person flyer, it didn't feel real. It was tacked to a bulletin board outside a grocery store in a town called Millstone, just a few miles from Rosehaven. The picture was the same one from the newspaper. Me, arm around Margot, that weary smile frozen in time. Underneath it said, "Suffers from early dementia. Reward for information." Dementia. That one stung worse than all the others. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, the wind flapping the corners of the paper. A few folks walked by and glanced at me, but no one recognized the man in front of them as the man on the page. I had become what I needed to be, invisible. They had rewritten me into a fragile old man who wandered off and forgot his way home. Maybe that was their truth, but mine was different. I hadn't forgotten. I remembered everything. I drove on until I reached the next town, stopping at a gas station off Route 17. I sat in the truck for a while, watching people fill their tanks, living lives untouched by betrayal. On the radio, some talk show host was rambling about loyalty, marriage, and the old-fashioned kind of love. I laughed out loud. The sound startled even me. It had been weeks since I'd heard it. When I walked inside to pay, the clerk handed me change and said, "Hey, you look familiar. You ain't that missing guy, are you?" I smiled, slow and steady. "If I was," I said, "you think I'd tell you?" He grinned back, shaking his head. "Guess not." That night, I checked into a roadside motel under the name Harvey Quinn again. The room smelled like bleach and loneliness, but I'd grown used to both. I laid the notebook on the bed and added a new entry. "They think I'm lost. Let them. The dead don't need to shout to be heard." Days turned into weeks. I picked up small handyman jobs wherever I stopped, fixing light switches, painting porches, unclogging drains. Nobody asked too many questions when you worked hard and spoke little. I kept track of the news, of course. Every so often, I'd spot a story online about the ongoing search for Harlan Quaid. Margot's interviews were always polished, rehearsed. Her eyes wet at the corners, her hands folded like prayer. "If anyone sees my husband," she'd say, "please tell him he's loved and missed." Loved and missed. I'd never seen such tidy lies. But one interview stopped me cold. Nadine was on screen, standing beside Margot, her eyes red and tired. "If you see him," she said, "tell him I forgive him." Forgive me? For what? That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about the girl who once begged me to build her a treehouse, who cried when I scolded her for staying out too late, who called me her hero in a second-grade essay. Somewhere between that essay and this broadcast, I'd gone from hero to burden. Maybe it wasn't just Margot who betrayed me. Maybe the whole idea of family had. But still, beneath the bitterness, something else flickered, something softer. A small, aching love that refused to die, no matter how much it hurt. I didn't want revenge anymore. Not the kind that burns. I wanted clarity. I wanted the truth to stand up in daylight and make them face it. So I changed course. I drove back north, staying off the main highways. I avoided the cameras, the tolls, the places where people might look too closely. By the time I reached the edge of my old town, it had been 42 days since I'd vanished. The house was still there. White fence, trimmed hedges, porch light glowing like it always did. But it didn't look like home. It looked like a stage, and someone else was playing my part. Through the window, I saw Corbett's truck in the driveway. Margot was in the kitchen, her movements sharp, busy. She looked older now, or maybe guilt had carved lines the mirror never told her about. Corbett came up behind her, his hand on her back. She flinched. He said something I couldn't hear, and she turned away. For the first time, I saw her not as the betrayer, but as someone trapped in the story she helped write. I didn't knock. I just stood under the maple tree where Jasper used to chase squirrels. The leaves whispered above me like an old friend who still remembered. I could have walked up to the door, rung the bell, and ended it all right there. But not yet. Not until they felt what I had felt. Uncertainty, loss, the ghost of something they thought was gone for good. So I made my presence known in quieter ways. The next morning, I left a letter in the mailbox. No signature, just words in my handwriting that Margot would recognize instantly. You said I forget things. I remember everything. The kitchen, the tie, the honey. June. No threats. No anger. Just truth. Then I slipped away before the sun rose. Later that week, I read online that Margot had gone to the police again. She claimed she'd found a note, that someone was playing cruel tricks. The officers chalked it up to stress. Corbett looked uneasy beside her in the news photo. Nadine didn't appear this time. The next letter I sent wasn't for Margot. It was for Nadine. I mailed it to her hospital, marked confidential. Inside I wrote, "When you were little, you once told me you'd never stop believing in me. I kept that promise even when you didn't. I'm not lost, sweetheart. I'm watching, and I'm waiting for you to remember who you were before they taught you to forget me." No return address. Just a single pressed maple leaf tucked inside. That night, under a sky full of stars, I parked near a rest stop and sat in silence. Somewhere out there, my family thought I was gone forever. And maybe, in a way, I was. The man they knew, the one who stayed, who obeyed, who endured, he was dead. But the man who took his place? He was just getting started. It was 3 months before I came back, not as a husband, not as a father, but as something in between. Something that didn't owe anyone explanations. The first snow of the season had started falling, soft and slow, like the sky was whispering secrets it didn't want anyone to hear. I drove through town at dusk, headlights glowing against the quiet streets. The houses had Christmas lights, laughter spilling out of windows. I used to love that sound. Now it made me feel like an outsider in my own story. The quaint house looked different. The curtains were new. The flower beds were gone, replaced by tidy shrubs. Corbett's truck sat in the same place mine once had. Same grooves in the gravel, same dent in the driveway from my old oil pan. A man can disappear, but the marks he leaves behind stay longer than anyone admits. I parked 2 blocks away and walked, my boots crunching against the ice. Through the living room window, I saw a tree, big, bright, and perfect. Margot was hanging ornaments. Corbett stood beside her, holding a box. Nadine was there too, sitting on the couch, her eyes distant. For a moment, she looked like the little girl I used to know, quiet, thoughtful, lost in her own world. Then she stood up, said something to Margot, and left the room. I stayed outside until the lights went out. Then I slipped a manila envelope through the mail slot. Inside was a copy of the property deed, the bank statements, and a letter written in my old, careful hand. "You said I was losing my mind. Turns out, I just found it again. This is me taking back what's mine, not to hurt you, but to remind you who built the life you're standing in. Keep the house if you must. But understand this, you built your new beginning on a lie, and lies don't hold through winter." Then I left, quiet as snowfall. The next morning, I met with Eliza at a small cafe on the edge of town. She looked up from her coffee and smiled faintly when she saw me. "Well," she said, sliding a folder across the table, "you've made quite an impression. Your wife and daughter have been busy trying to move assets that aren't theirs." I opened the folder. Inside were signatures, Margot's, Nadine's, even one forged as mine. "Can we stop it?" I asked. Eliza nodded. "Already did. I filed a motion with the county court under your original name. We'll freeze the transfers, dispute the power of attorney, and open a formal case for financial manipulation of a senior citizen." Senior citizen. I repeated, the words bitter in my mouth. "That's what they called me when they tried to bury me." Eliza leaned forward. "Mr. Quaid, if you want to stay hidden, I can represent you in absentia. You don't have to face them." I shook my head. "No," I said softly. "I want them to see me." That afternoon, we walked into the courthouse together. I wore my best flannel shirt and an old jacket that smelled of sawdust and resolve. When the clerk called Harlan Quaid versus Margot Quaid and Nadine Quaid, heads turned. Margot froze when she saw me. Corbett was there too, sitting stiff in the second row. Nadine's eyes widened like she was seeing a ghost. And maybe she was. The judge asked if I wanted to speak. I stood up, cleared my throat, and told the truth. Not the angry truth, but the quiet one. I'm not here for revenge, I said. I'm here because a man should have the right to finish his life standing on his own 2 feet. I worked for everything I had. I raised my daughter. I built my home. And when I was tired, I trusted my family to care for me. Instead, they decided I was easier to manage than to love. But I'm still here. I didn't forget. And I'm not leaving quietly. You could have heard a pin drop. Margot's lip trembled. Nadine's eyes filled. And for the first time in years, she looked young again. The judge nodded slowly. That, he said, is the clearest mind I've heard in this courtroom all week. The ruling came down swift and clean. The power of attorney was revoked, the property restored, and the accounts frozen pending review. I didn't look at Margot when we left the room. I just walked past her, slow and steady, the way you walk away from a fire you don't intend to rebuild. Outside, the snow had thickened. Nadine caught up to me near the steps. Dad, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know she. You knew enough, I said. My tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't forgiving either. She nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks. I was scared. You were changing. I thought you needed help. I did, I said, but not the kind that locks a man away. She tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. Go take care of your mother, I said quietly. She's going to need it more than I do. Then I turned and walked down the courthouse steps into the snow. That night, I didn't return to Earl's trailer. I drove west, no map, no plan, just miles and sky. I stopped at a rest stop where a group of travelers were sitting around a fire, passing coffee and stories. One of them, a man with weathered hands, nodded at me. You alone, old-timer? He asked. I smiled. Not anymore. He grinned. Pull up a chair then. Every man's got a story worth hearing. As the fire cracked and sparks climbed into the cold sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the kind that comes from getting even, but the kind that comes from getting free. For the first time, I wasn't someone's husband or father or burden. I was just Harlan Quaid, alive, awake, and no longer invisible. And somewhere, far behind me, under a roof built on lies, the people who buried me were realizing the truth. You can fake a lot of things, love, loyalty, even grief. But you can't fake the ghost of a man who refuses to die. It took me a long time to realize that freedom doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quiet, like dawn after a long storm. For the first few weeks after the court hearing, I drifted, drove across counties I'd never heard of, ate in diners that smelled like bacon and bleach, and slept in parking lots under skies so wide they made me feel small again. But it was a good kind of small, the kind that reminded me there was a world outside of pain. One morning, I woke up by a field of wheat near a town called Marlow Bend. The sun was just beginning to rise, gold spilling over the hills. I hadn't planned to stay, but there was something about that place. Honest, quiet, unhurried. I saw a small help wanted sign nailed to a fence outside a ranch. I pulled in. A man in his 70s, broad-shouldered and still strong, came out from the barn. You looking for work or just lost? He asked. Maybe both, I said. He smiled. Good. Lost men work harder. I'm Ellis. That's how it started. The days were long but simple. Fixing fences, hauling hay, feeding horses. At night, Ellis's wife, Martha, would invite me to supper. She reminded me of what kindness used to sound like before it became rare. She never asked about my past, though I'm sure she guessed more than I said. Some nights we'd sit on the porch, sipping coffee while the crickets sang. Funny thing about roots, Ellis said one night. People think they're just about staying put. But roots also hold you steady when the wind blows. You don't gotta be in the same soil to grow new ones. I nodded. I knew he was right. I wasn't looking to go back anymore. I was looking to grow again, even if it was in new dirt. Still, I couldn't quite shake the ghost of my old life. Every so often, I'd see Nadine's name pop up in the local news. She'd been promoted at the hospital, now managing her own department. Margot's name appeared too, though less often. There were whispers that Corbett had left town not long after the court case. Some said he'd taken her savings. Others said she'd sold the house and moved to live near Nadine. I didn't need the details. Betrayal tends to eat itself eventually. One Sunday afternoon, while repairing a gate, Martha walked over with a letter in her hand. This came for you, she said softly. From Maple Crest. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a short note written in careful handwriting. Mr. Quaid, I just wanted to tell you that your room here is still empty. I couldn't bring myself to assign it to anyone else. Some of us remember the day you visited, the way you smiled when you saw the garden. I hope wherever you are, you're tending to one of your own. Director Hall. For some reason, that letter hit harder than anything my family had done. Maybe because it came from a stranger who saw me as more than a case file. I folded it neatly and slipped it into my notebook, the same one where I had written my plans, my pain, my rebirth. That night, I walked out into the fields. Fireflies blinked through the tall grass like sparks from a forgotten fire. I thought of Margot's laughter before it turned bitter, of Nadine's small hand in mine when she was little, of Jasper's tail thumping against the porch. All the things that made a life, now scattered across years and miles. And I realized something. I didn't hate them anymore. I didn't even pity them. They were just people, flawed, frightened, selfish sometimes, just like me. I had spent too long trying to understand why they hurt me. But maybe some questions don't need answers. Maybe it's enough to keep walking forward. The next morning, I started building something behind the barn, a small shed that I turned into a workshop. I carved small wooden toys in the evenings and left them on Martha's porch for her grandchildren. It felt good to create again, to use my hands for something that wasn't survival. Word spread, and soon neighbors started asking for pieces, birdhouses, picture frames, even crosses for the local churchyard. One day, a letter came in a familiar handwriting. No return address, but I knew. I opened it slowly. Dad, I don't know where you are, and I understand if you never want to see me again. But I wanted you to know, I left the hospital today. I couldn't do it anymore. I kept seeing your face every time I told a patient's family, it's for the best. Mom's living with Aunt Carol now. She's quiet most days. Sometimes she still calls your name in her sleep. I'm sorry, not for the court or the house, but for forgetting who you were. Love, Nadine. I sat on the porch with that letter for hours. The sun went down, the crickets started, and still I held it. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't a moment. It's a slow thaw. And I wasn't ready to send a letter back. Not yet, but I would be. As weeks turned to months, life in Marlow Bend grew steady. I wasn't Mr. Quaid, missing husband anymore. I was just Harlan, the man who built things that lasted. Sometimes, when the wind came soft over the fields, I'd close my eyes and imagine Maple Crest's empty room, the one Director Hall said she couldn't give away. Maybe that was fine. Maybe some spaces aren't meant to be filled. They're just reminders that we survive the emptiness. That winter, I built a rocking chair from cedar and placed it under the big oak behind the barn. It became my thinking spot. One evening, as I watched the sunset bleed across the sky, Martha came out with 2 cups of coffee. You ever think about going back? She asked. I smiled. I already did, I said. Just not to the same place. And as the last light faded, I realized I'd finally found it. The thing I'd been chasing since that morning in the kitchen. Not revenge. Not justice. Just peace. By spring, the fields around Marlow Bend had turned green again. The wheat bent easy in the breeze, and the mornings smelled of rain and fresh soil. I'd built half a dozen birdhouses by then and repaired nearly every fence post on Ellis's property. My hands had calluses again. Good ones. Earned from work that asked for honesty, not loyalty. I'd almost stopped thinking about my old life. Almost. But ghosts don't fade. They wait for quiet hearts. One April morning, I came back from town with a bag of nails and a new handsaw. There was a letter waiting on the porch. No name, no return address, just my full name written in neat, deliberate handwriting, Harlan Quaid. It wasn't Nadine's script this time. It was Margot's. For a moment, I just stood there, watching the paper curl in the wind. Then I sat down in my cedar chair, opened it, and read. Harlan, if you're reading this, then you're still out there somewhere. I know you have every reason not to answer, but please listen just once. You were right. About everything. Corbett left not long after you vanished. He said I was too heavy to love, too much of a ghost of a life he didn't build. I deserved it, I suppose. I've spent my mornings in silence and my nights wondering when I forgot how to look at you with truth. Nadine barely speaks to me. She says I taught her to lie by example. The house is gone. I sold it to pay back what I could, and I've been living with Carol near Denver. It's quiet here. Sometimes too quiet. I started volunteering at a nursing home, Maple Crest. The same one we almost sent you to. I walk past your empty room every day. They still haven't given it away. Director Hall says it feels wrong to fill it. I think she's right. If you ever want to talk, you know where to find me. If not, I'll understand. Just know that I'm sorry, not for being caught, but for forgetting the man you were while I was still beside you. Always. Margot. The words blurred for a second. I folded the letter carefully and set it on my lap. Somewhere inside me, something that had been clenched for months began to loosen. It didn't make me forget what she'd done, but it reminded me that remorse has its own weight. That night, I walked out to the oak tree and buried the letter at its base. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it because some stories are better left in the ground, like old roots. They don't grow anymore, but they still hold the earth together. A week later, Nadine wrote again. This time her letter was longer, filled with guilt and questions. Dad, I keep seeing that day at the courthouse. I don't know how I didn't see it sooner. The strength, the quiet in your voice. I thought you were lost, but you were the only one who wasn't. Mom's trying, in her own broken way. I think she wants to make peace before it's too late. I've been thinking of coming to see you. Please tell me if I should. I read that line 3 times. Should she? I didn't know. I wasn't sure what meeting her again would change. But then I thought of the little girl with crayon stains on her fingers, the one who believed I could fix anything with a hammer and a smile. Maybe this was my last chance to prove her right. So I wrote back, on the same notebook paper I used to track Betrayal months before. Nadine, you can come if you want, but don't come looking for the man you left. He's gone. What's left is someone learning to live again. Bring honesty, not guilt. That's all I ask. Dad. I mailed it that afternoon. 2 weeks later, a dusty blue sedan pulled up the gravel road. I was fixing a fence post when I saw her get out. Nadine. Older, softer around the eyes, but still with that same nervous smile she used to wear before telling me something hard. Hey, Pop, she said quietly. I set down my hammer. Hey, kiddo. We stood there for a long time before she stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't one of those tearful movie hugs. It was cautious, human, like 2 people testing a bridge that had once broken beneath them. I didn't know what peace looked like, she whispered. Now I think I do. We spent the afternoon walking the fence line, talking about small things, the horses, the weather, her new job at a smaller clinic. We didn't talk much about Margot until the sun began to dip. She's not well, Nadine said quietly. She's in and out of the hospital. The stress did something to her heart. I nodded, eyes on the horizon. Some debts aren't paid in money. Nadine hesitated. She wants to see you. Just once. I didn't answer right away. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the faint smell of cedar from my workshop. Maybe, I said finally. But not yet. That night, after Nadine left, I sat under the oak again, the one shading Margot's letter. I looked up at the stars and said softly, I forgive you, Margot. I just don't need you anymore. And that felt like peace. Real peace. Not the kind that hides from pain, but the kind that lets it rest. The next morning, I found a small bird perched on one of my wooden birdhouses. It sang something bright and simple. I smiled, knowing that somewhere out there, my story was still being told, not as tragedy, but as proof that even the broken can rebuild. For the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost watching from the outside. I felt alive in my own life again. Summer came to Marlow Bend like a slow forgiveness. The air was heavy with the smell of grass and rain, and the fields swayed like a green ocean under the wind. I spent most of my mornings in the workshop, carving little things for the neighbors, keepsake boxes, toys, small wooden hearts that Martha sold at the church fair. Every night I sat under the oak tree, rocking gently in my cedar chair, watching the horizon bleed gold. Life had gone quiet. Not lonely, just still. Then one afternoon, a letter came from Nadine. The envelope was marked urgent. My hands trembled a little as I opened it. Dad, Mom's in the hospital. The doctors say she doesn't have much time left. She's asking for you, just once. She keeps saying your name, over and over. I know you've moved on, but if you can find it in your heart, please come. Not for her mistakes. For yours and mine. Nadine. I read it twice, folded it carefully, and set it on the table beside my coffee. For a long while, I just stared out the window. The decision wasn't easy. Forgiveness isn't a door you walk through. It's a gate you build piece by piece. And I'd spent too many years learning how to breathe without bitterness. But some debts aren't meant to be carried forever. So I went. The drive to Denver took most of the day. I didn't hurry. Every mile was a memory, good and bad. passing through my mind like old film reels. When I pulled into the hospital parking lot, the sky was turning pink. The last of the sunlight made the glass windows glow like they were holding something sacred. Nadine met me in the lobby. She looked tired, older somehow, but when she saw me, she smiled through her tears. "You came," she whispered. I said maybe, I said softly. Maybe turned into yes. She led me to the room. The sound of machines filled the air, steady, mechanical, almost like breathing. Margot lay there, smaller than I remembered, her hair silver against the pillow. Her eyes were closed, her hand resting on her chest. For a moment, I thought I was too late. Then her eyelids fluttered, and she whispered, "Harlan." I stepped closer. "I'm here, Margot." Her eyes opened slowly, and when they found me, they softened. None of that old pride or guilt, just something fragile and human. "You look the same," she said faintly. "Still stubborn." I smiled. "And you still find ways to have the last word." She gave a weak laugh that turned into a cough. Nadine slipped out quietly, leaving us alone. The years between us hung heavy in the air. "I wanted to tell you," she said, voice trembling. "I never stopped loving you. I just forgot how to show it. I thought comfort was love. I thought quiet was peace. But I see now, you were the only peace I ever had." I sat beside her and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, thin, but they still felt familiar. "We both lost our way," I said quietly. "But we found something on the other side. Maybe that's enough." Tears slipped down her face. "You forgive me?" I nodded. "A long time ago. I just had to find the strength to mean it." We sat in silence, listening to the machines hum. She turned her head slightly and whispered, "I kept your room empty at Maple Crest. I told them no one else could stay there." "I know," I said. "I got your letter." Her lips curved in a faint smile. "Then you know I was waiting." The monitors beeped slower. I leaned closer. "Rest now, Margot. You can let go." She took one last shaky breath, her eyes on mine, and then she was gone. Just like that, softly, quietly, the way she used to slip out of bed before sunrise. I sat there for a long time, holding her hand, feeling the warmth fade. No tears came, just an ache that wasn't pain anymore, just memory. Nadine came back in and stopped when she saw me. "She's gone," I said gently. Nadine pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling fast. I stood and put my arm around her. For the first time since she was a child, she let herself lean on me. "She loved you, Dad," she whispered. "I know," I said. "And now she's free." After the funeral, I didn't return to Marlow Bend right away. I stayed in Denver a few days, helping Nadine sort through Margot's things. We found old photo albums, yellowed letters, and the mug that still said Husband of the Year. Nadine handed it to me. "Do you want this?" she asked. I turned it over in my hands and smiled faintly. "No," I said. "Let's leave it here. Some things belong to the past." When I finally drove back to Marlow Bend, the wheat had grown tall again. The oak tree was heavy with leaves, and my chair waited beneath it. I sat down, the evening breeze brushing against my face. For the first time, there was no bitterness, no ghosts, just quiet. I thought about Margot, about the way she smiled in the kitchen that last good year before the lies. I thought about Nadine, finding her way back to honesty. And I thought about myself, not as the man who was betrayed, but as the man who survived it. Maybe that was the point all along. Not revenge, not justice, but survival with grace. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "We're all forgiven now." Somewhere in the field, a night bird sang, and I felt the weight of everything lift. When I went back inside, I opened my notebook one last time. On the final page, beneath all the pain and plans, I wrote, "In the end, peace isn't something you find. It's something you build, one breath, one truth, one forgiveness at a time." I closed the book and set it on the table, next to a small wooden bird I'd carved that morning. Its wings were spread wide, ready to fly. Then I turned off the lamp, let the darkness settle, and finally rested. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll. Hit like to honor Harlan's strength, comment your favorite moment of redemption, and subscribe for more powerful real lifestyle stories that prove it's never too late to rise again. Because sometimes, disappearing isn't the end, it's the beginning of freedom.